Hi, I'm Jan Doyle. Welcome to Classroom Connections. I'm really excited about today's show. I have two gentlemen on that I met about a month ago, maybe two, at a very unlikely place, the Madison Green, and they are interesting, exciting, and they got me interested in a subject I thought I would never care about, archaeology. So I'd like you to welcome to the show Don Rankin,
Sorry.
and Gary Nolf. Did I get that one right?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, thank God. So, do you consider, gentlemen, yourselves archaeologists?
I'll let Gary speak first.
Okay.
Well, we're avocational archaeologists. We don't have a degree in archaeology. My background started with my grandfather walking through the fields after they were plowed finding arrowheads. And he worked with Yale University way back in the 20s doing excavations. So my background started when I found my first arrowhead I was 6 years old.
How did you know it was an arrowhead? So did someone explain that to you? Or?
Well, my grandfather, you develop an eye for these things. You can look at a stone and say, well, that's not a stone, that is an artifact, or it isn't. And we do a lot of that. People bring artifacts to us and they say, gee, this looks like an arrowhead. And well, sorry, but it really isn't. And, be very diplomatic, but...
They're depressed.
Yeah, because they brought this because they thought it was really exciting. And look, it looks just like an arrowhead, but it really probably isn't.
And what are the characteristics then of an arrowhead? If someone at home is watching and they think they have the one.
Well, I can show you quickly on this. If you look at that stone, it actually has a center line right there. And right there, and it's chipped on both sides, and that's called a biface. And the way they made these is they would take a hammerstone and they would chip away at the stone on this side and it would flake it on the opposite side. So if it's just a broken stone, it's not going to be shaped on both sides. It's going to be just unifaced and it won't have any secondary flaking on it.
That's really interesting because I thought I found arrowheads, but it didn't look like that. Now you just used a word that I think I heard somewhere else, flaking, that people can tell if it's a site, if there's flaking around. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. Well, if you consider the fact that now this happens to be a knife that Don found, and it would be used like this for scraping hides and that type of thing. Now it looks like a rock, but the fact of the matter is it's a biface because it's been chipped on both sides. Now if you can imagine this was a rock this big, and now every time you hit it, a little piece flakes off. So you might have 200 flakes in making this. So you find the scatter of the flakes, and we call it the debitage, or we call it and that gives it an indication that we actually have a site, rather than just, if you're in a field and you don't find any flakes, generally speaking, you're not going to find a camp.
Oh, that is interesting. Now, how did you find that rock?
Well,
did you call it a rock?
Well, it's an artifact, Jan. So this, it would be like starting golf and going out on maybe your second day hitting a hole-in-one, because I was just getting involved. We had selected a glacial erratic boulder for the Hammonasset boulder, and we had a plaque written for, actually I wrote the verbiage for the plaque, and Nick Bellantoni tweaked it a bit, and Dale Carson. And I asked Dale, I said, how can we dress up? And she said, well, the rock, why don't you plant some grasses? Native Americans weren't big into flowers, so digging down to plant some miscanthus grass, 15 inches in the soil. This was lying on its side, waiting for Don Rankin to pick it up. I looked down, and by that time I had worked a bit, I guess, with Gary, or was familiar somewhat. And it was maybe a year or two after that first festival. And I picked it up and I went like this. And I said, holy Toledo, look at that. So this is, like Gary said, this is a scraper. And this would have been used to clean the inside of a deer hide or maybe to cut meat.
Oh,
but this is a bifacial piece, like you said. And this is the most, the lithic material is quartz. These are the most common, this is the most common lithic material used by Native Americans that was native. The only lithic material, well, except for basalt and axis. So this was used to make arrowheads. Very difficult, except for material that was brought in, like flint and chert, and Gary can talk about that.
I just want to say that something like this, I'm a little bit more educated now, but I could easily see myself passing over that.
Absolutely. You know, it's the thing about it is the context in which it's discovered plays a role at times. This, for somebody who's done archaeology, will recognize it immediately. There's no natural geologic process that produces this. But sometimes, because I can look at it, I can tell it's been worked on both sides, like Gary said. So this is there's no question about this. But sometimes we get pieces that maybe there is a little bit of question. But then if it's found in context with chips of quartz and so on, that helps substantiate that this might have been an early camp or village site where Native Americans were making tools and so on.
Well, I know this show is watched by a lot of parents, and they bring their children out, and the children obviously don't have any background. So how do you suggest a family kind of gets involved in doing some of this with minimum knowledge?
This is perfect. And if anyone's watching, we didn't rehearse this.
No.
Come to the Makes Point Festival, October 4th and 5th, if this is going to show before the 4th and 5th.
It will show, yes.
Okay, because there'll be a number of primitive technologists making points and artifacts. So you'll see how it's done. And then they'll be right next door to where Gary will be holding the New England Atlatl Championship, so we'll be talking about that. So people can begin to understand how the Native Americans made their stone tools and so on.
And this festival, I've been to this festival over the years, so this is going to be showing before the one this year, but it also will be recycled throughout the years, and people should just know that this is a fabulous festival in October at Hammonasset.
Well, and this festival honors the history of Connecticut. So there's historical stuff too, but the big Hammonasset Festival, which will be held next year, that brings in more Native American stuff. We bring in the drummers and dancers and so on, and that's that we charge a fee for that event. But for this one coming up October 4th and 5th, it's a free event. There's free admission to the park. There's parking is free, and the event is free. So
that's
there's
a good price.
That's a very good price.
It's
a Scottish-Irish kind of thing. You know?
I love that price.
Yeah.
And so families can come and children, and they can actually, because there's nothing like touching something.
Absolutely.
Also, the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology will be there. Now, the Friends group was formed, and I was a charter member. In fact, I was the first president of the
And
Friends.
I understood you're really one of the lead people in forming the group.
Yeah.
Now, why did you form this group?
Nick Ballantoni, the state archaeologist, did not have any budget for any help. He was Nick Ballantoni, and that was it. He had no one to help him. That was it. Now he has statute. He is required to do certain things by state statute as a state archaeologist, but he needed people to help him. So we formed this group. I was the first president, and what we did was just volunteer to help him whenever he had somebody is building a house and they find the remains of something. Well, he has to go in and do a survey. Well, we would help him do that survey. We just did a survey last week in Killingworth.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Did you find anything?
Yeah, we did a dig at the Titus Cone house, homestead. Titus Cone was a missionary to Hawaii back in the 1830s, and his homestead, he was born in 1802, is in Killingworth. And then it's since fallen down, and so Nick decided to have his field school from Yukon come and do an archaeological dig there to see what we could learn about the family, about how they lived. And the things that you find broken pottery, we found a pipe stem, we found the types of material we found showed that this person wasn't very affluent, that they probably used their stuff for a really long time. Some of it was mid-18th century artifacts. And it was a really interesting, we also were looking to see whether or not it burned down, fell down, that type of thing. They're still working on analyzing all the artifacts. They go back to Yukon, and
do they do it in a grid-like way?
Yes. It's all done in a grid. Everything is identified, marked. How deep it is, coordinated. It's all.
Just as an aside, why did they allow this house to fall and deteriorate?
It fell down in the 1800s. So his father.
I think the last picture was 1880 or 80, something like that.
His father died in 1856. And it went to another family member. The family member sold the property. someone else lived there for about 10 years, moved out, and then it just fell,
Just
fell down.
Well, that's very interesting. Now, we're talking about arrowheads, and I know you have a display. Do you want to talk about that, or?
Oh, absolutely. So, Jan, we're working for you. Whatever you want. We're here.
I have to tell you, I love him when he says that. I'm just saying.
No, this is so cool. It's hard for me not to get excited about this because the history of this is almost as fascinating as the projectile points themselves. Okay, so what happened was in the middle 60s, I think 1964, 65, a CL&P crew was coming in to dig a hole for a utility pole on the corner of Old Route 79 and Yankee Peddler. Old Route 79 skirted around wetlands and became somewhat isolated when they straightened 79 right into town. This would have been in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Old Route 79 sort of skirts around the wetlands. They dug the hole and out started to pop these projectile points. Now these were linemen for CL&P. So they said, let's call Hank Golette. Now Hank Golette was another lineman, but it had an interest in Native American artifacts. So Hank collected up this collection.
So these linemen didn't have to call.
They didn't have to call anybody.
They could have put them in their pockets.
So, Jen, we need to talk about that because when people find stuff, they need to get in touch with somebody. So anyway, so Hank comes, puts the collection together, a different case. Gary recased all of this, did a great job, and held on to it until about 5 years ago. And he comes into the Scranton Library and he says, I think it's time for the folks in Madison to see this collection. So they call me from the library knowing that I'm involved with archaeology, and I looked at this collection and I think I just went, wow. So one of the first people I called was Gary. I called Dr. Bellantoni and I said, Nick, you're not going to believe what just was brought to our attention. So we'll just I'll start and Gary can add, but these points are called Mansion Inn type points because projectile points like this, when they've been found with organic material, we can carbon-14 test. These points date back to 2,600 to 3,600 years ago. Fascinating. 2,600 to 3,600.
It's hard to get your mind around.
Hard to get your mind around. That's right. The lithic material here we believe is a banded slate, not from Connecticut. We think maybe from New York State, maybe the Adirondack area. And these are what we call blanks or preforms or pre-manufactured. In other words, they've been chipped out, like Gary talked about with a rock, just roughly chipped out and not finely flaked. So these are preforms. They're roughly in the shape of a projectile point. And so they were brought in, and a guess could be that he had a cache of them for his own supply, or maybe he brought them in for trading purposes. And these are projectile points, and we think a good number of them, maybe all of them, could have been fashioned into points for spears that would have been launched with an atlatl. We'll get back to this because this is well before the bow and arrow came into Connecticut. So this is a wonderful collection. And so when we reported this to Nick, he came down and we used students from Daniel Land High School, and we did several test pits right around the telephone pole. We knew exactly where it was. But what had happened, Jan, was that we think in the preparation of the landscape for homes and so on, the topsoil was scraped away. We found absolutely nothing. At some point it might be of value to go back in there and get permission from private property owners to see whether this was in association or what we call a seasonal camp or village site. Maybe. But just imagine just digging a hole and having this auger going around and spit out these points. It was just an unbelievable collection. So now this is mapped.
Now, you said, what do you mean by mapped?
It's mapped on the state archaeologist map.
So that if other things are found, it adds to the information for that area.
Because, you know, what archaeology is about an interpretation and understanding of earlier peoples, earlier cultures. And involved in that would be, besides the tool making, the kinds of tools, maybe even the trading routes. And we know, Jan, that old 79, guess what? It was an old trading route.
Oh, is that
And we've
right?
got a map of those trails. You want to
Isn't
see
that
the map?
interesting? Yes, I would love to.
Okay, we'll put this aside. We can. Gary,
While you're
did you
doing that,
wanna-
let me just tell you a little bit more. What's really significant about this is that it tells a story. You've got to remember that this person went up to New York State, or someone from New York State gave to this person. And these are, we call them exotic materials. Like this is a piece of chert. This actually is from
A piece of what?
chert.
Could you spell that?
Yeah, C-H-E-R-T.
Okay.
And it's the same chemical composition as flint, but it's definitely in this North America, it's called chert. Anyway, so this is a material that is, it works better than quartz. Quartz is very difficult to work. So this type of material was prized. So they go up there. Now, rather than bring a whole pile of rocks back to Connecticut, that's, you can imagine how much it would weigh before they started chipping them. So they chip out these blanks. So all that debitage stays up there. So they put it in a bag, and they start it through their trade routes and bring it down here. And they either, trade it for a fur or trade it for whatever they needed to, trade it for. And these, as Don said, are 2,600 to 3,600. Now, people look at these and say, well, there's an arrowhead. Well, they really weren't arrowheads back that old, because the bow and arrow didn't come into this area until 1,500 years ago.
Well, that was something he mentioned that I was going to pick up on, that I don't think I really knew. In fact, I know I didn't know that. I thought bow and arrows were always here.
Right.
I've watched the Westerns.
Right.
I've seen, John Wayne and the Indians. I've watched,
Sure.
so it's pre-bow and arrow.
Yes.
So we didn't
Yeah.
have teepees out here. We didn't have horses. And it was pre-bow and arrow up to 1,500 years ago.
Oh, I never knew that.
See, the horses were brought by the Spaniards, and there was a Western thing. And the bow and arrow, again, came from the west to the east. It took them about 500 years for it to get from there to here.
I had no
And-
sense of this at all.
And
at
people
all.
have been here for 10,000 years. So,
That's really interesting, because most people who watch the show know that I'm now a retired teacher, and I had no sense of this. And I know other people don't have a sense of it. So what you're doing, your job is what? You're educating me, but the audience. But what is your and I know you're volunteers.
Well, so first of all, Gary and I are enjoying activities that connect with our passion. This is fun stuff. It really is a lot of fun. I mean, it's looking for Easter eggs or something like that. But more importantly, what archaeology about is revealing an earlier culture and how people conducted themselves. And frequently, if we're at a rock shelter, I'll sit back, and I think Gary does the same thing, and we sort of wonder, what was it like to be here 6,000 years ago or 9,000 years ago? How did we deal with the wintry conditions that were more severe 7,000 or 8,000 years ago than they are today? How did they survive even? What were their relationships like? And what were the family structures like, and so on? So what archaeology is really the discovery and interpretation and evaluation of artifacts. And artifacts are man-made, man-altered natural substances. And through that interpretation, we begin to understand, because this is all prehistoric stuff. Sure, Native Americans have their stories that are handed down, but this is a more scientific way of looking at artifacts and where we find them and so on to interpret the lifestyle, and more importantly, what's their mindset? What were they thinking?
Have you ever considered writing a book on this?
well, there are many books that have been written on it.
Yeah,
From your perspective, excuse me, but have you considered, because you have an enthusiasm and passion that is contagious. I happen to be at my favorite place in life, Starbucks, and I was talking about you, and the woman said, "Oh, I know him." And she knew who you were and she had met you someplace, and you were talking about this.
Well,
and I said, "Yeah, that's the guy.
Well,
that's the guy."
Well, Gary and I give a lot of talks.
I know.
And I give talks on other things too, the evolution of the universe, stuff like that, and our connectedness. I personally feel, Jan, that we have a lot to learn from Native American culture, really. The realization that we're connected, everything is connected in nature, and that we need to respect that. And we're talking about some of the lessons that you learned from Bernie Siegel in Native American culture, everything was considered a gift from the Creator. So there's no need really to complain about anything. So everything was a gift. And it's a wonderful way to see life. So there's really no need to complain. And the way women were treated in general, so women and elders, that's me and Gary pretty soon. You know, I don't know about you,
That's
Ken,
me.
but I'm an
That's
elder.
me. I'm an elder.
You know, we're just because they were treated with respect, and children as well. And this is maybe a discussion for another time, but the respect and the connectedness of that we have in nature was something that was held dear and sacred to Native Americans. And now we're finding, through our understanding of the universe and the evolution of the universe, that all life is connected. You know, so the cyanobacteria that evolved 800 million years after our Earth was formed is the grandparents of all plant and animal life. So it is through biology that all plant and animal life are connected. We're brothers and sisters, and we need to respect that. And through our elements, we come from Mother Earth, Grandmother Earth. The elements in the earth that make this comes the silicon dioxide, silicon and oxygen, the most common elements in the Earth's crust. And Jan, they were created in exploding stars. So through biology, we're all connected. Through our chemistry, we're connected to Mother Earth. And through our very nuclear structure, we're connected to the universe. Wonderful stuff.
I want to get back to,
Okay.
you guys are so knowledgeable about this in a way that I've never experienced before, actually, and felt the excitement of, I mean, because honestly, I was telling another friend, I said, it's about archaeology, and they said, oh, come on. Come on, because the subject itself doesn't ring exciting until you talk about it and hear it from you guys.
Yeah, I would recommend Connecticut Archaeology, if you can get that from the library. I think Nick was the main writer for that. You know, it's out of print now, but Connecticut Archaeology, go to that. It'll be a primer.
I mean, there's a lot written. I mean,
There is
that
a
you
lot
can,
written?
Yeah, and you know, you can look things up and online and stuff, but you know, we get such a kick out of bringing kids out and having them actually do things.
Yes,
And
yes, that's,
you know, we did Yale University. We did their their summer camp twice this summer. We just did a thing for the water company last week for
the
kids.
water company. Now
Yeah.
that surprises me.
Yeah, they had a field day at one of their reservoirs, and they had a fishing thing. They had other things set up, and they asked us to come and do an atlatl thing. So we did it last year, and we did it again this year.
Wow. Now, we are at, we only have about 5 minutes left. And so I think what I'm going to save, and I'm going to tell the viewing audience, with the next show, we're going to go right into the, I'm not going to pronounce this correct, Atwile? No.
Atlatl.
Atlatl. I've been practicing it, apparently not enough. But I want to talk about the map.
All right,
and
so we'll finish
kind of
that
finish
up
with the map.
and make it all come together here.
Yeah.
So this, I don't know if the TV can pick this up, but this is...
You know what? I could hold it too.
Okay, so this is, what you're looking at here is a map of the Native American trading routes and trails that that was believed to exist around 1625 or so. And actually, this route right here, this is old. It goes right where Route 79 is, right up near Middletown and so on up to Hartford. So this is old Route 79 would have been down here. So those points were discovered right on the side of an old trading route. Okay, and maybe the next show we can get into geology and explain why 79 was where it is.
That would be great.
Yeah, and it's sort of a fun thing. But this is the Shoreline Monongahtuck Indian Trail. This is old Boston Post Road. You know, so the trading routes were and there was a reason why. And again, we can talk about this in the next program. Why they were the way they were.
Point if you like.
Well, you know, this is. You know, so this is Boston Post Road, right along through here.
And the Boston Post Road was an old trading
Yes, it was, for the most part. Yeah, and even minor alterations for traffic patterns and flow, and when certain wetlands got filled in, there was some alteration in the main route, you know. But you can still see the old Boston Post Road where the colonial houses were. So you know, when you get involved with archaeology, having an appreciation of geology is important too, because how the landscape was used and shaped was important as to how Native Americans used that land. We use the same kinds of things. We live because we get jobs in this area for one reason or another. Native Americans moved around because they had to survive. You know, their culture was one of living off the land and surviving off the land. Well, we can talk about
I find
that.
this map very, very interesting. I actually have never seen one like this before. And again, I feel that's sad, actually, being a former elementary school teacher. And I think it adds a lot to the understanding and a lot of the words.
Well, I mean, here you have the Hammonasset. So
Yes.
it also shows where the Native American tribes, Hammonasset, it's Algonquian word. All the tribes up and down the eastern coast spoke Algonquian language. There was different dialects. That means where they dig holes. Quinnipiac, Quinny, long body. Eac means place of. Quinnipiac means place of the long body. We presume Long Island Sound. It's funny, I ask people that go to Quinnipiac University, I say, you know what Quinnipiac means? I have no idea. But that's what it means.
Yeah,
and the
because you don't think about it.
And the word Connecticut comes from Quinnipiac, which is long tidal river, long body of water that has tidal effects. So Quinnipiac became Connecticut. So
That's
these are
interesting.
So these are historical ties.
Yes.
You know.
I'm just going to ask my director to tell me how much time we have left so I know what I'm doing. He just told me.
Okay.
We have to wrap up the show.
Okay.
But I want to ask you, if people wanted to get more information about this subject, where would be the best place that they can go?
Well, one thing they can do is the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology, they can join the Friends group and actually be involved in when we have a dig, when we are going to.
Oh, that's exciting.
And it's really a fantastic way. They can just go online, Friends, FOSA, F-O-S-A, Friends of the Office of State Archaeology, and join.
That's,
And,
is there a fee involved?
yeah, it's nominal.
Nominal?
$5 or
20,
something like
25
that.
for
Yeah.
a family.
Oh, that's
so,
realistic.
I
and
mean, we
doable.
had people at this dig a couple weeks ago, and all of the VOSA members were giving the people paying for the course for the field school, and they were there helping and showing them, how to set up the grids and
Yes,
and,
yes.
and then being involved in the whole dig.
Yes, and it's exciting.
Sure.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for coming on. We're definitely going to have part 2. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're very
Well,
welcome.
Jen, thanks for having us. You're a fun gal, and learning should be fun. So that's what
should be fun.
it was always fun for me. I was one of those weird students that I enjoyed learning, and I think that what Gary does, it's such an honor to be Gary's friend because. How many people chuck spears, and then he was on the
Yeah,
David
and
Letterman show, and I said, "Whoa!"
And live to tell about it. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for being on the show.
Sure. You're
And we'll be having part 2 of this coming up very, very shortly. Thank you.